welcome to Aviva Studios. My name is John McGrath. I'm Artistic Director of Factory International, which is the organisation that runs this wonderful building alongside Manchester International Festival, Factory Academy and much else as well. So welcome on this sunny Saturday. Thank you for coming indoors, but it's lovely and cool in here, isn't it? To our ongoing series, Artists in Times of Upheaval. So Artists in Times of Upheaval is a programme of talks and discussions that we've been doing for the last couple of years, exploring how artists create their work and live their lives in situations of global change. We've looked at artists from all sorts of places in the world, including here in the UK, as we go through our own changes and upheavals. And today we're delighted to invite three artists who have roots in different ways in Iran to talk about how and why they make their work today. The artists are going to introduce themselves with 5-minute samples from their work, and then Shanaz Gulzar, the creative director at Bradford City of Culture and former producer here at Factory International, is going to sit down with each of the artists and talk to them more about their work and then offer an opportunity for you also to ask questions. So we're going to hear from Mahboobeh and then from Omar Ahmed and then from Javad, and they'll each introduce themselves and their work. So over to Mahboobeh first.
Thank you so much for coming. So my name is Mahboobeh Rajabi, and I'm an artist and creative entrepreneur. And I usually put two parts of the hats that I'm wearing. One of them as a creative entrepreneur. As you see in the videos, I'm so passionate about creating spaces that artists and communities can get together, and then using art as a tool, as a way that we can express ourselves. So my work is always ongoing about the situation that's happening in the world. So what you see in the videos was our artistic practice, doing exhibition, performances, but allowing also the audience and the people to have a space to talk about art and be engaged with the artist process, and which is my organization DIPACT. And also I run another organization called DIGI GEM, which is all about AR, technology and creativity. The part of me as an artist, I am a visual artist and a digital artist who use videos as a medium to do theater performances. And also, not only that, I do exhibitions. Any space that I can find that I can be a voice to a message that cannot be told without art. Because art is the most powerful way to make sure that we raise awareness or talk about the things that we want to say. And for me personally, it's about the lived experience of being a refugee from Iran back in 2009 and telling that a story of what my life basically changed. And usually my practice is specifically based on my own lived experiences and also growing to become a creative entrepreneur, a cultural leader, and doing so many talks. So I basically take this space to make sure that we talk about really important conversation, but in a very creative way. And one of my big projects is Made in Persia. As a Persian, I'm really interested in to talk about my country and also what it means for me to be an Iranian artist live in the UK. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Omid Asadi, and I'm a visual artist. I came to the UK 2007, and I started art 2012 when I was 33, 34 years old. And I choose two examples of my practice. I come from south of Iran, which is a ceremony happened there. It's called Dammam Zani, which is they use it for several reasons. The religional reason, or when young people die, they do this ceremony, or when they want to announce it. So I choose this actual drum, actually replaced it actual drums with the oil drums, which is the south of Iran. Oils come from, and also I'm working in oil. Before I work as an engineer in the oil industry in Iran, so I think this is the way I can talk about the situation, about immigration as well. I try to address some roots of the situation of immigration, not why this happened, why especially in the west of Asia, or call it Middle East, why all this is kind of happened. I try to address some roots of that. So if you change the... Yeah. So I replaced the drums, the actual drums, with these drums, which is all, each of them represent of one companies in the, for example, the BP, and the situation between BP and Iranian is very interesting, and all other shells, Texaco and others around the world. And the performance coming to this installation and start playing Dammam. This is a special rhythm they played. If you change to another, yeah. And when the performers start performing Dammam, is a kind of special rhythms. There is the oil inside the drum start leaking and start to ruin that beautiful Persian carpet. And after almost 10, 15 minutes of performance, because this mess happened, so the performance should, they have to leave. And yeah, and you see what mess happened, and you see the footprint of their performance. And at the end, yeah, this is the result of, the performance, which is kind of, I call it installation, happened through the performance, actually. The second work, it's a kind of political, geopolitical work. But this has come from my experience, but personal experience, which is talk about collective memory as well. So I choose different things, which is, when I was 2 years, I was living in Iran. When I was, and in South, the war happened when I was 2 years old. And we have to move to another city. And there is a picture of our home, which is completely destroyed by bomb. and that was the first time our home completely gone. And another time, it's ruined not because of the war, because of the urban development. So this is kind of things I was thinking. So the people who lived here, who have got grown up here, they have got experience, they have got good memories, when those spaces doesn't exist anymore, what kind of feeling we experience? And this is about that. So I collect something from Iran, for example, the cassette, if you see from here. This is a kind of several cassette. One of them is a poems from Ahmad Shamlu, which is most of the time I heard it in my childhood. So I'm coming from a political family, so always I heard that. Another one is a story of our children. There is another element of my mother's sewing machine and the heater we used. This is the books I read in my when I was teenager and changed my view to completely. And yeah, and these bricks comes from demolished houses in Manchester. I believe each of them has got a story and memory inside them. And yeah, and we collect thousands of dandelions seeds and we put them inside the installation. The audience may have got different experience from that. For me, also, every time I sing that is different. So you don't know this is ruined house or this is a start to building. So you can decide and you can make it to what you want. So this is some kind of details I show you about. And others pictures. Sorry, I think I missed the time. Thank you so much. Sorry.
No worries.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Javad Alipour. I'm a British Iranian, I guess, theatre director and founding artistic director of the Javad Alipour Company, which is a international touring contemporary theatre company based in Manchester. As you can tell from my accent, I didn't, in fact, grow up in Iran. I grew up from somewhere about an hour from here called Bradford, and I come from a sort of mixed background, and that to some degree is reflected in some of the things I'm going to say about my work in this short little introduction to it. So if I could have the next slide, please. And then one more, please. Thank you. I guess the shows that we are kind of best known for are like what sometimes I talk about as a trilogy of shows, and I'm really interested in how theatre as an art form specifically can hold a space that can explore the relationship between how basically two things, so the breakneck pace of technology and the breakneck pace of social and political change are shifting everyday life, how we think about ourselves, our hearts, our souls, our sort of the vistas we think are possible politically around us. The first part of that trilogy was a show called The Believers Are But Brothers, which was the eagle-eyed will recognize as a line from the Quran. And that was about masculinity, extreme politics, and the internet. Like a bunch of these shows, you know, it was part documentary and part fictionalized. And I guess later on we might get a chance to talk about why I think that is a particularly interesting way to talk about politics. Could I get the next slide, please? Thank you. The follow-up to that show was a show called Rich Kids, A History of Shopping Malls in Tehran. Rich Kids being the way I was trying to translate the word Aghazadeh into English for Persian speakers. Yeah, like it was a show that sort of started me making work about Iran more directly. I didn't sort of set out to do this, but I realized that there was, you know, I speak Farsi, like I sort of know a bit about the history of it, and I realized that there was something really important in terms of the kind of Eurocentricity of progressive discussion, of the discussion a lot of my audiences were having, that my kind of, the stuff I get for free off of being Iranian, speaking the language, blah, 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 meant that I could, if you like, compare two different parts of the world that I guess I would like to think made the work I was making feel a bit more genuinely international rather than the kind of work where we often see where I guess people are confusing talking about Europe and America with talking about the whole world, if that makes sense. This got some coverage in an Iranian theatre magazine there was one of the funniest reviews I've had because I wrote this and was in it. And I think there was a confusion about the person who was talking about in Tehran because they credited the writing to someone called Javad, which would be my name, and the acting to someone called Javid, which is not my name. I think that's a different guy. Could I have the next slide, please? This was the follow-up to the last part of that trilogy. It was a show called Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World that was ostensibly about the murder of Feridun Farrokhzad, who's like a super famous Iranian, I guess, pop star, dissident, all these other things. But at the same time was, really a show about how we in the contemporary moment trick ourselves into thinking that we can understand cultures in a way that's perhaps more simple than it sort of really takes. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. As a director and as a person who runs a company, and the next slide, please. I've made different kinds of work as well. So our most recent production was this show that we worked on with Shanaz at Bradford, and indeed Jen's here as well, called Elmet, which was an adaptation of a novel set in West Yorkshire, sort of where I grew up. And it was a very different sort of work, but on one level on the surface. But I guess one of the threads connecting it for me was that feeling of wanting to, I think one of the things I feel our responsibility as artists is to sort of seduce people, bring people into, if you like, trick people into thinking about stuff a little bit more deeply, thinking about their own complicity in things, the way they're enmeshed in things a bit more deeply than perhaps the contemporary moment usually gives us sort of chance to do. And I guess if I could, I think there's one more slide, right? Could I have the next one, please? Is there one more? No, is that it? Okay, cool. Yeah, I guess like the final thing I'd say about the sort of the bit of me that makes work about Iran and stuff is like, I think that idea of like complexity feels really important to me as a British Iranian artist. Just like the idea of the freedom, however problematically we have in this country, it means a lot to me that I'm able to, the Iranian part of me, that I'm able to make work about the corruption and the kind of nasty lifestyles of the Oghazadehs in Tehran, or the way that people like Feridun Farrokhzad are murdered by, the regime in countries like this. And of course, a lot of people who are trying to make that kind of work I'm trying to make in Iran are not able to do that. So that feels like a thing that's really important to me. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. As we're setting up, I'm just going to say a further thank you for leaving the sunshine and coming and having this fantastic conversation with us this afternoon. We're really privileged to have Omid, Mahboobeh, and Javad with us today. 3 artists with a huge diverse practice. I think just from their explanations of their work this afternoon, you're in for a really rich conversation. We will have time for Q&A at the end. I have staff here and team here who are keeping me very much to time. And as you can see from our 3 fantastic artists, they've got quite a lot to share with you. So please do have questions ready at the end of the session. And if you have any comments, please save those to have a conversation with the artists afterwards. This is your opportunity at the end of the session to really ask anything that from what the conversation that we've had, that you feel that you need to ask. So thank you for being here today. I'm going to ask Omid, Javad, and Mahboobeh to make their way to stage as Mahboobeh runs to get a drink. Thank you all, and thank you so much for taking us. It's a whistle-stop tour through your work for all three of you. And thank you for that, because it means I can dig in a little bit more when it comes to your work, what drives you, you know, what your passions are, and what you're thinking about currently as well. So Mahboobeh, I'm going to start with you. And I'm going to ask you to kind of talk a little bit more. You have a cross-art form practice. You talked about, you know, AI, tech. We saw a lot of work that you do with people. So you know, socially engaged practice, working with participants. You talked about the cafe and DIPACT. So can you kind of expand a little bit more on your practice, but also tell us what drove you to start thinking about being a creative entrepreneur? Because I would also argue that all artists are creative entrepreneurs, because we have to be. So just a little bit more on that.
Sure. Thank you so much. So the reason why I became, you know, just who I am today, I think all my work has a big tie to being a political refugee from Iran on a very young age. I've just turned 21 when I had to leave the country. And when I came here, I had to go through the asylum process, which took about nearly 6 years. But through that process, I've met so many artists that was incredible from their countries, but because they went through the asylum process, the sector didn't have a system to recognize. For example, they had 10 years of experience, 20 years, 30 years, and it always made me so excited to meet them, but at the same time to be like, why do you have to be in a loop of just an emerging artist or not being seen? If, for example, they would get a visa and come here, they would have a red carpet for them. So that was kind of like the idea to start DIPACT as a collective with artists, and this is how we grew. And in 2021, I kind of realized that we need money. And it took me years to understand that there's a kind of a part of British culture to be shy talking about money. So it took me years to really understand that actually, you know, just talking about money is something that I have to push. And I totally agree with you. All the artists are creative entrepreneurs. It's about being visible in the sector, about getting paid. And so starting DIPACT as a cafe clusters was what's better than food and getting together and talk, because it creates an environment that would allow people to relax. So food as an element in our sort of like every project that we do, it became something really fundamental. That using that as a method that we could practice getting the communities together, do art, and not only that, even talking about difficult conversations. So Global Roots Cafe is actually even implemented in all our art projects, because the food is provided from the Global Roots Cafe. It means that the community is involved with that. So, yeah.
So that feels like you have a very encompassing practice, that every encounter that you have drives the next project or drives what you're about to do next. So just kind of thinking about encounters and thinking about conversations, and how do you kind of living in Manchester, having made your home here, bringing your children up here, how are further conversations driving, you know, the further direction of your work? Or what are the other ideas? To use an analogy around food and growing, what's being seeded for you?
I think it's the element of you have to listen to people in the communities. And I give you an example. For example, we recently did a project called We Need to Keep This House, which was the response to an exhibition at 1853 Studios. But we specifically had lunch so the people could get food, and we could talk about the heaviness of me telling about my lived experience. Because there is also a gap and a paradox in what you see, for example, even in the political landscape in the UK, rather than listening of what people are saying. Because we can take sides, or we can just very easily kind of like have a judgment or assumption of something. But it's never like when you actually sit down within the conversation and understand and listen. So a big part of our work is deep listening practice to really understand what is going on. So that's why, because my work is specifically in everything that's ongoing, so it's always changing. For example, the new thing about AI, for example, is something really new that we are working on at the moment as well.
So you very much respond and are responsive and are flexible to what is happening and the conversations that you're having. Javad, kind of from the kind of conversation with Mahboobeh, I want to talk about your trilogy and the work that you make as you're an artist, director, writer, and often you've been all three, acting and performing in your work. The trilogy, you were in that work, you were on stage, you embodied your own writing. And could you talk a little bit more about that trilogy and what drove you to make that? You explained that a little bit, but just kind of further and a little bit deeper for us.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one thing I would say is I was in those shows, but I'm not like an actor properly. Like I basically, like if I'm on stage, I'm sort of doing a shtick that's like, I've done some research, I'm going to share it with you, and we have sort of dramaturgical fun with that through the show, basically. But like, what that allows us to do is, I was saying, I think there's something particularly like useful in terms of like complicating the way we simplify how complicated the world is, if that makes sense, of sitting in that place between fact and fiction sometimes. What got me into making that trilogy was that I used to run a community theatre project in Bradford. I used to be a youth worker before that, and then I did like community art stuff. And then I was like, I want to do professional practice with all professionals, touring work. And I was like sort of thinking about, well, what's something that feels like super of the moment now that I could make a sort of documentary style show about? And it was like 2017. So it was like the high point of ISIS in terms of their holding land in Syria. And there was a sort of slightly Islamophobic, slightly racist chat in the media in the UK that was like, what is wrong with young Muslim men? Because they were European Muslims male Muslims were doing like terrorism or whatever. Because I spent a lot, at the time I was younger, I spent a lot of time online, I'd heard of 4chan, things like this. I was aware that like, I sort of became aware that, so forget the Middle East, forget why someone joins ISIS in Syria or whatever group in Iraq or whatever. In Europe, the single biggest predictor of someone taking part in like a terrorist attack is that they're known to the authorities for something adjacent to domestic violence before. So they have, in some way, at school, the youth services, the police, have noticed some sort of an attitude towards women. Yeah. Do you know who else that's true of? That's also true in the United States of white guys who shoot up schools and stuff like that. So obviously, I wanted to take this idea and go, look, what's the problem with young Muslim men? What's the problem with young men, man? Do you know what I mean? Like there's a masculinity thing. And so that's the way that show worked, basically. And the trilogy came out of making that and realizing there's this, I guess, alchemy between how we think about politics and like the medium is the message, how we exist in our daily life, how stories haunt us in different ways than they used to do. And just feeling there was a thread there to hold on to.
You also have a manifesto, which I love. I love the fact that as a theatre company, straight away, you hit your website, you actually, either it's you on screen talking through your manifesto or we read through it. And there's a quote from that, our projects will think specifically about what kinds of people are missing from the conversation. And what you've just talked about, it's young men. And as you say, it's young men who are disenfranchised, disengaged, and you've talked about violence towards women. And that's a direct connection. That's not just here, not just in the UK, but as you said, it's almost like a global. There's a global identity there, and that all young men are struggling with. That quote from your website about those conversations that are missing. How do you manifest that? How do you ensure that those conversations with audiences? You've just described that when you're on stage, it's like a documentary style show. It's a shtick. You do directly speak to the audience. You don't just speak to yourself, and you present to the audience. So how are you working with participants and audiences to do that?
I guess like this is like the kind of thing that unites, like that trilogy of work with like the thing that we worked on with you guys for Elmet at Bradford and other kinds of the work we do with young people and communities. And like, I think, look, what I am really interested in about theatre is like work that feels live and work that plays with feeling live. It strikes me that like the biggest political question and the biggest communication question we face at the minute are questions that are about like the sense of isolation. That's a very vague way of putting it, but like the kind of the shift from what you could think of as a mass culture of the 20th century, right? There are 3 TV channels, pick one. There are 2 newspapers, pick one. There are 2 political parties, pick one. Go to the factory, get a job. Like mass culture to whatever this thing is that's being born now. And whatever this thing is that's being born now is much, much more about a kind of recursive sense of something which is maybe even a part of us smaller than the individual. So I'm like, what better art form to explore the context of this than the bit where we physically all have to be together. And like, so aesthetically and in terms of like actual artistic form, Elmet looks very different to that. Like it didn't have projection in, for instance, but what we were still trying to do is make something that felt like this could only happen here now. We're gonna like talk to you directly sometimes. Someone will play a musical instrument, crazy shit will happen. Because we're trying, I guess it's about trying to make a case. We're often trying to make the show, but also make a case that this thing we're doing together is important. And there's something here that we are thinking about and feeling that like it sounds like such a bullshit thing to say, but no conceivable TikTok video could make us think about or feel. I'm being facetious, but you know what I'm driving at, I think.
That kind of leads me nicely, actually, into Omid's work. That's a very powerful piece of work that you showed us. When I was looking at the image of the carpet and the sand and the drums, because of the way you took the image, it felt tiny. It felt really like almost like it was a stage design model or something, or a model of the work that you were creating. And as you kind of spoke about it and the images unfolded, it was incredibly powerful, really, really, even just, not in the room and seeing you perform as an artist and being there performing. But could you it shows in your work that your experience, your history, your identity is very much woven in. And that's for all 3 of you. For all artists, experiences, their lived experience, what's happening globally, what's happening societally drives us. Omid, I'd like to hear more about, what is the driving factor for you? What is the core heart nucleus of your work?
Actually, I don't know. I think anything comes from decision making, and not just comes from my conscious mind. It is very connected to my unconscious as well, so I don't know. So I live that kind of experience. So, and I see the result, and this is part of my living. This is part of what I'm doing here. This is and those things make the doors open to new ideas, and ideas like this one. Actually, I don't have any proper explanation of what this comes from, what...
It's instinct, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's instinct, and, that process, I suppose, of... What is the question, I suppose, you were trying to answer with that piece of work? Or was there a question?
It's not the... Yeah, the big question is, especially we are come from Iran, and a big things we see, immigration or refugee out both together. I also, and we know what this experience means, but I'm looking to digging a little bit more to find some roots of this situation. This is not the answer to the big question, why this happened. This is one answer, and there is other answer, other factors, but also, this is kind of, the thing comes to my mind. This is the, not solution, but things most of the time I'm thinking about that. So why this happened? Why, what caused this problem? That kind of things I think maybe.
Well, you decided in 2012 that you were going to be an artist. Well, and you, from being, and I was saying earlier, those of us from an immigrant background and our parents who have, when you tell them you're going to university and the first one in the family or everything, they're like doctor, lawyer, teacher, engineer, accountant, that's it. You decided to become an artist, having been an engineer and a boxer, as well. What drove you? 2012, 33 years old, he said.
Yeah, for me.
And did you have to ask permission to your parents also?
I think on that time, being an artist, especially visual artist, it was the last thing I could imagine, especially in that time. So I came to art by kind of accident. So in 2012, I was quite depressed about why I couldn't find a job in the, for example, oil industry. And I tried many things, but none of them was successful. And I talked to myself, what can I do? The only things came to my mind is studying again. This is the only option for me. But at that time I said, okay, this time I'm studying just not for a job. I'm going to study what I really like. Two things came to my mind at that time. One was philosophy, another one was men's fashion design. So,
both brilliant. And
yeah.
Both related, actually, I'd say.
Yeah. Then I talked to myself, okay, my English is not good enough to study philosophy in another language, especially 2012. I'm still struggling, imagine it, 2012. And after that, I said, okay, I'm going for fashion design. I went to college. They said, okay, we have got level 2. Do you have any background in that field? I said, no, my background is industrial. And they said, okay, we have another course. It's called art and design. Go for it for 1 year.
Doesn't that tell you everything about colleges and thinking, you know, if you've not got anything else, so why don't you come into the arts? Not recognizing just how powerful, all three of you, the work that you are talking about, how powerful your work is. But doesn't that tell you about our education system, really?
Yeah, and I went to that course, and after 3 months, I said, wow, what is that? This philosophy involved, design involved, psychology involved, everything I wanted, it was in that field. So then I start from level 1 at college, 2012, and I graduated with MA in 2018.
And look at the work that you've made. So now, you couldn't tell us the decision, but I think this answer and your earlier answer actually illustrates for us and the audience how you got to make that work, that incredibly beautiful, powerful work. Now, this question to all three of you, it's not easy in the world right now. It's really difficult. There's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of tension, and artists are... we say artists are the zeitgeist, but I find that artists are normally ahead of the zeitgeist. And it'd be, you know, Mahboobeh, to start with you, because you're directly working with people. You're working with people, asylum seekers, refugees, people who come carrying particular experiences and history and how they're finding themselves and seeing themselves not only reflected locally, but how what is happening globally is affecting them. How is what is happening around us, local to global, having an impact on your work and the work you want to make?
So in order to answer that question, I want to also mention that making trust with communities that come from that background is a very key element. And one of the main reasons that I always say I was privileged because I went through that trauma. So when I go to that space and I say that I've even been sent to detention center in Yarswood. So when I just share with them, this is also me that went through the failure of the system and also coming from that background. And I want to also mention something that kind of, it created a bit more clear of why it shaped my work. The last kind of time that I remember Iran, the last time that I left that country was I'm the generation from the Green Revolution. So I was a student of university. So the last image I saw my city, Shiraz, was actually in a chaos of officers in the street. And I remember I had a moment that, now that I think about it, it was like a Hollywood movies, because I couldn't believe that the officers were attacking students in that protest. And I was like, stand there looking speechless because my body couldn't react. And I had a friend grabbing me that, Mahboobeh, you have to sit down, they're shooting. And on that time, they were not using like machine guns, but they were like using these little guns that have little metal things. And I remember that on that moment, and then after a few weeks, I had to leave Iran because we're in the list. And to get arrested. So my choice was to be sort of like dead or just leave the country. So that was the image that I left my country. And I saw my beautiful city, which was, you know, Shiraz was always has been a tourist, you know, just city for people coming from around the world, for the literature, for the beautiful weather. And then whenever I started to do the work, that image always stayed with me, that this is why I had to left Iran. And also working with the communities and people that comes from countries that goes through conflict, I could feel them. And it's really important. It's not just about thinking that you have sympathy. It's just about understanding that not only they carry that, but they are also professional people. They are people with life. It's just a chapter of life. But we have to live it through. So imagine me coming here in 2009 and then going through different years of different protests that happened so far that we are here today.
Iran is a deeply, deeply rich, historically rich, you know, in culture, creativity, literature, music, and in our kind of contemporary understanding, that's almost being eroded. And what you've just described about your presiding memory of Shiraz, Shiraz is in books. You know, it's in the Shahnameh, which you have a lovely tattoo on your arm there, Javad. And it feels like the myths and the history of Iran is being eroded by this version of Iran. My earlier question to you, Omid, about how the unrest that is happening to all of us, from local to national and international, how is that impacting your work and the work you are choosing to make?
Yeah, there is a quote. It said, "Believe we left Iran, but Iran never left us." So it's a kind of, so we live here, we're living with the news and what's going on in Iran, and yeah, the people there and our families there. It's a kind of, and also when you expand it in the world situation, so now is what's going on around the world, and the powerful countries and, you know, people in the west of Asia, and there is a lots of things to talk and think actually, and I started things since I was teenage about, and actually if you want to know what's going on, you cannot find out it from the news. No. You have to read the history and see why we face this situation now. And
is there a particular idea that is forming for you, or are you working on something right now that, because it strikes me that you're an intuitive artist, but the work emerges for you. You don't kind of start with, you know, a design or a script or anything. You are, you know, the work forms as you are working on it. So is there something that you're working on currently?
Yes.
That you can share with us?
Yes, actually I start with something basic, so the idea, the feeling, and then when you start working on it, the working on it sometimes is working with your hands, sometimes it's just in your head. So then there is a long process. So the picture you saw, this is not a complete work, came to my mind from nowhere. You know, it's a long process through the seeing, reading, thinking, and feeling. That's the kind of things are involved. I think.
Thank you, Omid. Javad, same question to you. What's impacting your work? You are, you know, someone who's driven by ideas, by politics, by, you know, the right for everyone to have what everyone else has. You know, there's a socialist equality drive in you. As much as, you know, what Mahboobeh is doing, you have a lot in common. What's driving you right now, and how do you see your work manifesting and what's happening manifesting in your work?
Thank you. It's a really good question to answer. I guess, like, in my life and in my practice, I try and separate out the part of me that is an artist and a lead artist and a director and whatever, from the part of me that's an artistic director and kind of, you know, leader of this company that I've built. Because the leader of the company built part of me, of course, that company produces a lot of my work, but especially as we're growing, as we're trying to flex in different ways, my job as that is to set a policy, right, and set a set of provocations and set a sense of what success looks like for us, and to build the community that can kind of hold that for us. And where to answer, and the answers for me on those questions are slightly different to each other, because the bit of me that's like an AD is a bit more like I sometimes do bits of like, let's say, journalistic opinion writing as well. I've written for The Independent. I've a couple of times been on Sky News talking about Iran and like this kind of business. And like in that, basically that part of me is related because it's based on going, okay, I read the world this way. I have a hypothesis. I have a view about not making things perfect, but like a better version of this would be, you know, whatever. And like, there's a bunch of ways that I in my life have to contribute to that, right? One of which is to try and be part of running a company which is part of creating an ecology for a certain kind of art to exist. Another is knocking on your door at election time and telling you to vote for the candidate, asking you to vote for the candidate I think you should vote for. You should vote, yeah, not telling, this is not Iran, asking. Another bit is like writing something for the Indie or whatever. But as an artist, like I feel like the thing I'm good at and the kind of work I'm trying to make is in a way the opposite of that. I'll often say, I won't make a show or start a project if I know the answer to the question I'm asking. If I know the answer, I'll write about it, or I'll knock on your door and tell you what the answer is. That makes me sound much weirder than I thought it was going to make me sound. But you see the point I'm making. And actually, like my favorite feeling from a show, because it is quite political work and stuff, is people have got, like with the Feridun Farrokhzad show, with Things Hidden, people at the end of the show in the bar, you know, would say to me, like, especially non-Iranians would say to me, like, yeah, but like, what are we supposed to do about the fact that we live in these cities where there's Iranians and Tibetans being chased by the Chinese regime, and how can I possibly, you know, show solidarity? And I go, well, I mean, I literally just said everything I've got to say about this in the show, you know, and I'm sort of searching for that feeling. So, yeah, I guess those are my two responses.
It's still working. There's obvious kind of links between everything that all three of you have described, and you've talked about you don't know what the question is that you want to answer. You know, Omid works very intuitively. You know, Mahboobeh, you flex and you shift and you change. You know, you code switch constantly within your work as well. I'm going to open up to the audience now and to say, you know, these fantastic artists, what questions do you have for them? And don't be shy. Okay, we've got one at the front and then one at the back and then another one. Great, thank you, ladies.
Hello. I really admire each of you, and I really feel what you said, and I think I'm just I was in that road as well. The thing is, from each of you saying, I feel there is kind of strategy we need to as an artist, or even as a leader of a, for example, organization, or, you know, I've got the same situation. The thing is, we need to apply kind of strategy, or we need to just find the own. You know, I say strategy rather than the own way, because as an artist, as an immigrant artist, we need to find a bridge between what we want to say instinctively, like Omid said, you know, intuitive, the way, or find the culture in here and just get the feeling of the way we need to transfer what we want to say in this culture, or because who wants to listen and find a way to just convince the audience, listen to my story, or listen to the way I want to say it, or I want to transfer it. So what I'm saying is not just want to hear more about each of your, you know, strategy. About, for example, you, Mahboobeh, I know you very well. If you want to say in a, you know, short way, what do you say? between the way we Iranian want to speak about what we lived, our own experience, and then find a way to how you convince your audience to listen to that or come to your show or wants to get that bridge. You know what I mean? That's the thing.
Sure. So I think the answer to your question is very simple, because I felt like we have to be brave enough to tell the story, because I found myself, because I've been born and bred in a dictatorship and it was like forbidden things. So suddenly you have a shield of, is it going to be okay for me to say it? But actually, even as an artist, you find a way that I'm going to be brave enough because this is my story and I have to say it. And I think not having any other challenges to think about, but only how you can be you and tell that story the way you want to say. And it took me a few years to realize that we should not be scared. First of all, nobody gonna arrest me here. Like that sort of like fear of, I have the platform to say what I would like to say in the way that I want to. It actually had the most effect on people who come to and see my work, especially like, for example, with Made in Persia, like when the people come and me telling my heritage kind of felt a bit more easy for them to understand, even the paradox, you know, just that we currently living all our life, but actually be yourself and actually be brave enough to tell the story. I think it's really important.
Thank you, Mahboobeh. Great question. And that's one that many artists struggle with, you know, regardless of background as well. Many of us struggle with that. There was a lady at the back who was the next question.
Hello there. Thank you so much for being so generous with your responses. I can qualify the question afterwards, but the question I have is, must art have a purpose beyond art for its sake? And I realize that that can be read in different ways. I can qualify that if necessary, but I'm just going to ask it and let you answer.
Omid?
I can say that when I came to the art, I have a big ambitious. I'm going to change the world. So through my art. So, but every day pass, I realize I can't do anything. So, one exhibition, what kind of, you know, what can I change? And I felt like a Don Quixote or Don Quixote. You know, he want to change the world, and you know, he just make a fool of himself. But at the end, I realized maybe I cannot change anything, but Don Quixote did the big things. He created imagination of change. So the only thing came to my mind, maybe I can start imagination. So your answer, art for art's sake or not, or you know, responsibility. I don't. This is a big argue through the art history. So what you are good at, do that. So if you are good, very good to create forms without any responsibility, do it. If you have got some good context and good form together, do it. This is a kind of, I've been in some galleries in 2019 Venice Biennale, and I visited some very good artists to just make forms, nothing else. I enjoyed that. So it doesn't need to be, you know, we live in dictatorship. Art should be this, art shouldn't, you should, you know, make decision for others. We should create a landscape and feel to everyone flourish what they want, I believe.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you, Javad.
Yeah, could I come in that? I don't know if were you going to there would look like there's going to be a follow-up.
Sorry, I was going to clarify and qualify it by the fact that you are three diasporans, or three people with experiences of the in-between of having multiple identities, of having challenging histories. And I often find that it's those who have gone through something that are called upon to speak on it, and sort of get positioned as the Orient to the sort of Occident of the greater geopolitical situation. And so, yes, you will make the work that you make because you want to make it, and it might happen to speak to the sort of the larger conversation. But there's also other structures that kind of funnel you towards focusing perhaps on certain topics that because of who's funding, because of who's commissioning these things, because of venues. So I'm always I'm not asking the questions with the assumption that it's one or the other, that there's a straight answer, that it's art for art's sake or not. So I'm kind of interested in that in between, mucky, complicated, unresolved area. So yeah, that's sort of.
Yeah, if I can jump in on that. Yeah, and no, it's a really good question, man. And like, I feel like all art exists. I mean, everything exists in the kind of the context of market pressures and so on. I guess because we sort of in our country, in the kind of where we make, there's a kind of sense of subsidy and so on. That sense of market pressure can often get mediated as the venue thinks that ultimately it's like it's not that different to like the person at the record company telling the band this is the lead single, right? Do you know what I mean? And actually that show, Things Hidden, like a large chunk of that was me trying to satirize a specific kind of diasporan work, especially from someone from a diaspora like me who's like second generation or mixed or whatever, where like that person stands on stage and they, you know, supposedly are going to change the world by like sharing how the thing they've been through is a metaphor for the terrible way in which some other people have suffered. Do you know what I mean? And I guess like, so I'm really sort of like cognizant of that. I guess like my answer to that question about art for art's sake or whatever is like a little bit like what you were saying, Omid, but to the extent that like I do think that like kind of modern contemporary art is almost always something that's like aware of itself as form, like in different ways. You know what I mean? Depending on what the aesthetic is, depending on what the art form is, and so on. But what's weird is whenever art does change the world, it sort of seems to do it in very, very askance and odd ways. I'm gonna open the box of like talking about the Iranian Revolution of 1979. We can close it then immediately afterwards if we'd like to do, that's fine. But one interesting thing is that like, so without getting into some massive discussion about the Iranian, one little bit of historical fact of interest, of like one of the things that goes on in terms of the radicalization around that revolution is that a bunch of university students go to the Goethe Institute in Tehran, because there's a sense of liberalization happening once the Shah's regime. And so basically a bunch of like semi-officially banned Marxist plays are performed by a bunch of undergraduates in the garden of the Goethe Institute in Tehran. A bit of Brecht, a bit of whatever, I mean, I don't know off the top of my head. Point is, then the police turn up outside and like, we're going to arrest you when you come back and when you come out and whatever, and these guys refuse to leave. And that's certainly not the motive force of what happens. But like, what's interesting is, you know, if you were to sit down and be like, you know, like an old-fashioned kind of political agitprop artist, like, I am going to write a play and someone's going to read it in a garden and then there's going to be a revolution. It's not going to happen, right? But people make work, it interacts with history, things happen, right?
Thank you for that. That was a great question, and it's something that we're all constantly grappling with, especially when you make funded work. But artists need to be funded to make work, to be paid. It goes to Mahboobeh, the question that we had with Mahboobeh right at the beginning. I'm conscious that you have a question, and I'm also conscious of time. But if there's another question, that's fine.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. First, can I firstly say that was so interesting, and thank you for all that you do. Art is not easy, and it's not always well funded as well, so thank you. My question's for Javed. I'm interested to know, as I'm second generation migrant in this country, and I'm just wondering, as an Iranian working in Britain, how do you balance resisting your cultural heritage how do you balance your cultural heritage with resisting expectations that your work should speak for a whole community or nation? Because every time our artists of minority backgrounds are doing work, it seems to be we're representing the whole nation or the whole community, when it's much more complex than that.
Well, look, I mean, to be honest with you, it's such an important question, right? I think for us in this country as minority artists. I also then almost always feel the need to say, like, it's not, you know, that's in the context. It's a very different question to like, how will freedom one day come to Iran? Do you know what I mean? And we need to like not confuse lanes here. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying you're doing that, but sometimes I think we do that, right? We sort of confuse the question of like racism in the global north with like a whole other thing that's happening in the global south. What I would say about the global north thing, that minority thing, is like there's a way out of this, man, right? And the way out of it is that there's no such thing as identity, that it's all hybrid, we're all making up all the time. And if you're a minority person, that's not like, yeah, for sure you face some bigotry and all this kind of stuff, but that's not intrinsically something that makes you weaker. We've sort of forgotten this a little bit, but if you think, cast your mind back to the crazy days of the late 90s. Stuart Hall writes this essay where he talks about, he says, it's one of the last things right before he dies, and he says, the thing that gives me optimism is, he says, when I look at young black and Asian kids in this country, you know, obviously the two big minority communities, when I look at black and Asian kids in this country, no matter how poor they are, if they don't know where their next meal is coming from, that they know they're where the future of culture is coming from. Why? Because the 90s felt like this moment of the world being connected in new and exciting ways. And it kind of, however poor you were, there was this intellectual recognizing that to be hybrid was to be where the wind is blowing. I always give the example of like Prince Nassim Hamed, right? You know, the boxer, Nassim Hamed. You know, Nassim Hamed was like a hero to South Asians in this country. Wasn't even South Asian, man. He was Yemeni, you know. That brother used to, this is genuinely true, that brother used to come out to box, right? And he would wear a fucking lungi made out of a cheetah cloth. I swear, this is genuinely true. People who've come to this country since. He used the azan, he used the call to prayer as his ringside music. Yeah, so they put it on and come out like this, like you know, like I'm this like terrifying guy. You should all be scared of me. And do you know what? British Muslims loved him. White people had a complicated relationship to him. But point is, everyone knew he was very good at boxing. And I would compare him to the biggest South Asian boxer of the last 10 years in the country is Amir Khan, right? Does that name mean these people? There are few humans more boring than Amir Khan, but I tell you what he leads with, like in all of his like vibe and how he presents himself, is that he's like an authentic third generation. He does the traditional thing. Oh no, he's cheating on his wife. Oh no, he is respectful, blah, blah, blah. And so what I'm saying is, there is a way out of this. Now, I'm not trying to say we can pretend the racism doesn't exist, we can pretend the hurtful things don't exist, but I am saying we could just think about that identity as something to be proud of, something that is actually gives us a privileged access to the truth, which is that we're all hybrid and we're all making it up all the time and no one's really anything.
It's about making the work, isn't it? Making the work, and if the pressure of how that work is understood and how audiences choose to understand it, or how funders choose to fund it, or how venues choose to program it, actually the artist is going to make the work regardless. And that kind of experience of it, or that choice of where it sits or where it's placed, as artists, you can choose to engage or disengage with that, which I think goes to what you're saying as well. So I suppose what the panel and this conversation this afternoon is, you know, and if there's anything that I'd like you all to leave with, is the passion, the power, the drive that is on this stage with all three of these artists to make the work they're making. And art does change the world, Omid, I am going to say that. And you are changing the world because that piece of work that you made has done that. And it might not do it, you know, in a massive, massive way, but that big way, that massive, you know, change will come probably in that person who was in that room who makes a decision at some point down the line. Art does change the world, and that's how I'm going to leave this conversation today. Thank you, everyone.